World War II ended over 75 years ago, right? Well, not exactly. If you're Russia or Japan, World War II continues to this very day. We'll explain. On August 8, 1945, the Soviet Union officially declared war on Japan, sending more than 1 million battle-hardened troops into Japanese-occupied Manchuria. Fresh off its recent victory over Hitler's Germany, the Soviets turned their attention to their old nemesis, Japan, and towards Japanese-held territories in the Pacific, including Manchuria, Korea, and an area that the Soviets had been feuding over with Japan for nearly a century, the Kuril Islands. In the midst of the final days of the Pacific War, and on the same day the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, the Russian army strategically invaded these islands and seized them as their own. The territorial dispute over these islands has led to an odd present-day situation, where because the two neighbors have never formally signed a peace treaty ending World War II, Russia and Japan are still officially at war. These islands, referred to by the Russians as the South Kuril Islands, and by the Japanese as the Northern Territories, are a chain of 56 islands that are part of the belt of geologic instability that circles the Pacific Ring of Fire, featuring at least 100 volcanoes, 35 of which are presently active. Among these islands, there are 4 disputed islands, Kunashir, Itarup, Shaikotan, and Hobomai, that divide the Okhotsk Sea from the North Pacific Ocean and stretch from the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido to the southern point of Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. So why all the fuss about a few seemingly random islands in the Pacific Ocean? First are the natural resources. The islands are bordered by productive fishing grounds and are believed to hold significant offshore oil and gas reserves. Additionally, deposits of a rare and very valuable mineral, rhenium, used to make important components in jet and rocket engines, have recently been found on a volcano in Itarup. Perhaps more important than resources, however, the islands are also extremely vital because of their military significance and strategic location. With Japan's post-World War II emergence as a Western ally, Russia's future foreign policy strength relies massively on freedom of movement for Russia's Pacific Fleet, which is based in Vladivostok, Russia. Accordingly, Russia's Pacific Fleet's access to the Pacific lies either south through the Sea of Japan, where access routes to the Pacific are under control of foreign countries, or north through the Kuril Islands. For Japan, the region holds massive cultural significance to the Japanese people, primarily to Japan's indigenous Ainu residents in Hokkaido, who have lived in the area for centuries, well before either Japan or Russia laid claim to the islands, and whose borders lie a mere few kilometers from the islands further south. Additionally, with China to its west and Russia to its north, Japan is acutely aware of the massive superpowers it is surrounded by, and it wants to maintain and ensure freedom of movement in the seas surrounding its borders. Because of these many issues, Japan and Russia have yet to sign a peace treaty to end World War II. So how did the dispute first start? In the early 18th century, the Japanese began migrating north to the Kuril Islands, including many members of the Hokkaido's minority Ainu community. This migration continued over the course of the next century, and at the onset of World War II, nearly 17,000 Japanese residents lived on the island. But these islands had long been a source of contention between the historic rivals. In 1811, in an incident termed the Golovnin Incident, a Russian explorer by the name of Vasily Golovnin was tasked by the Russian Tsar Alexander I with mapping the Kuril Islands. However, he and his crew were captured by the Japanese and held prisoner for 2 years. Nearly 40 years later, in 1855, Russia and Japan signed the Treaty of Shimoda, which gave Russia ownership to all but the 4 southernmost islands. It is on the basis of the terms of this treaty that Japan continues to assert ownership over the Kurils. Over the course of the next century, there were several additional treaties and agreements between the two nations where ownership of the Kurils and other islands traded hands on numerous occasions, which brings us to 1945 when Russia seized the Kurils as its own. Having sustained millions of casualties during World War II, the Soviets viewed the Kurils, among other territories, as spoils that should properly go to the victor. Formalizing these island seizures, the Yalta Agreement formally ceded all of the Kuril Islands to the Soviet Union. Under this arrangement, the islands were handed to Soviet Russia, and 17,000 Japanese were deported and replaced with 30,000 Russian residents. Several years later, in 1951, the Allies and Japan signed the Treaty of San Francisco, which required Japan to give up its rights, title, and claim to the Kuril Islands. However, the pact did not formally acknowledge the USSR's ownership over the islands, and Russia refused to sign. With the Japan-Soviet Joint Declaration in 1956, diplomatic ties between the nations were restored and improved, and Soviet Russia offered to give up the two islands nearest to Japan. However, Japan refused because the two islands formed just 7% of the disputed territory. So where do we stand today? Since World War II, both governments have worked to improve ties through economic incentives, such as collaborative oil and gas projects on the disputed islands. In 2018, then Japanese Prime Minister Abe Shinzo and Russian President Vladimir Putin reiterated their commitment to begin peace treaty discussions based on the 1956 joint statement, which specified that the two smaller disputed islands will be handed over to Japan with the signing of a peace treaty. However, no further progress has been made. In fact, in 2020, Russia deployed missile systems in the region in an effort to underline Moscow's firm stance in the dispute. These missile systems, capable of hitting sea targets at a range of 500 kilometers, are part of a series of recent moves by Russia to beef up its military presence in the region. And since the outbreak of the Russian war against Ukraine, diplomatic and commercial ties between the two countries have deteriorated even further, with a definitive settlement involving the islands looks to be out of the question, with Japan freezing the assets of Russian banks and placing export restrictions on diesel engines, semiconductors, and other high-tech products. Russia recently added Japan to its list of unfriendly countries. It also revoked visa-free travel, restricting former Japanese residents from visiting the now Russian-controlled islands. In light of recent events, reaching a territorial agreement with Russia appears unlikely for Japan. Putin, who has just authorized the unprovoked takeover of a sovereign country, is unlikely to approve the handover of land to a U.S. ally. The fact is, under Putin's administration, Japan has little chance of reaching an acceptable territorial resolution. This is a blow for former Japanese residents of these islands, the average age of whom is now over 86. However, there may be a silver lining in terms of foreign policy. For years, Japanese administrations have been hesitant to confront Russia for fear of jeopardizing the progress of territory negotiations. With the territorial agreement clearly out of the question, Japan is now free to rethink its policies and join Western partners in adopting a harder position against Putin's aggression. If you like this video, please leave a like and a comment below. Also, if you're new to this channel, subscribe and click the notification bell to get notified when we upload more content. We'll see you in the next one.